Thanks, Derek. And welcome to Washington, everyone. National Conference is always a special event for me, partly because it's the only ESOP Association event that I don't have to travel for, but mostly because it's the one conference where our attendees are directly helping to shape the future of ESOPs. And since many of you have been living and breathing advocacy all week, I thought I would take a little bit of time to talk about what I think our future might hold. I was asked to sort of give an advocacy update, but most of you know where we stand right now. But over the next 3 to 5 years, there are some really interesting mega trends that I want to share. So I want to begin with a question that I've been sitting with for a while. And when historians look back on the first quarter of the 21st century, what will they say about the defining economic tensions of this era? And when all of the sort of near-term immediacy of sort of our individual economic frustrations boil away, gas prices and the cost of bread and our frustration with affordability, when they all sort of boil away, I think that historians will say this, that America struggled urgently and painfully with 3 fundamental failures. First, a failure to build wealth broadly, while at the same time incentivizing wealth consolidation. And relatedly, a failure to secure a dignified economic future for working people that included a pathway to a dignified retirement. And finally, a failure to protect the privately owned Main Street businesses that have always formed the backbone of the American economy and where so many of our young people first get their start. Now, I also believe those historians will note the moment, right about now, when an old idea began its renaissance, when a proven, bipartisan, financially sound model called an employee stock ownership plan stopped being a niche strategy and became a national priority. I believe that moment is now, and we are not spectators to it. We are the architects of it. Now, I know speeches are supposed to stick to topics of groups of 3, but I'm going to beg your patience today because I want to quickly walk you through what I see as 7 converging forces bigger than any one election, any one Congress, any one economic cycle, that are bending the arc of public policy directly toward what we do. And I want to leave you with a roadmap for the next 3 to 5 years, because this window is not going to stay open forever. So let me start with a number that should alarm every person in this room and every person in Congress. According to the most recent Vanguard data, the median 401k balance in America is $38,176, representing an entire life savings in the most widely held retirement vehicle available. And it's worth less than the typical cost of a Toyota Camry. That's not the average, that's the median, meaning half of all participants have less than that. Now, Social Security, which pays the average retiree just $24,000 a year, faces trust fund failure just 8 years from now in 2034, when payments will begin exceeding the income. Now, it was never designed to be a permanent or complete retirement system, yet for tens of millions of Americans, it has become exactly that, the last line of defense against poverty in old age. Hardship withdrawals from 401k plans are now hitting record highs every successive year. More than a third of those withdrawals are taken to avoid home foreclosure or eviction. Think about that. American workers are raiding their retirement savings not to take a vacation, but just to stay in their own homes. I raise these because this is not a marginal problem. This is a systemic crisis that is coming at us like a freight train that Congress will be forced to confront. Now, here's where we come in. ESOPs have been the single most effective retirement plan contemplated within ERISA when measured by any metric. It's not even a close fight. Because ESOPs haven't required and don't require employee contributions, workers are building ownership and retirement wealth without taking a dollar out of their paycheck. The average ESOP account balance now exceeds $230,000. ESOP plans will distribute nearly $175 billion in planned benefits this year alone, and that amount is rapidly increasing in the future. So it should be little surprise then why more than 8 in 10 ESOP workers report confidence that they will retire comfortably, nearly double the confidence of non-ESOP peers. So when thinking about the retirement crisis, ESOPs don't tinker around the edges. They solve it at the structural level for the workers who need it most. So when Congress searches for retirement solutions in the next few years, and they will, we must make sure that the ESOP answer is the first answer that they hear. Now, the second major force is generating bipartisan anger unlike anything I have ever seen in 35 years in this work. Researchers, journalists, think tanks, and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are converging on a damning picture of an out-of-control private equity industry that uses financial engineering and tax breaks to extract value from companies, workers, and communities. The mechanics are well documented. PE firms acquire companies using leveraged debt. They charge management fees and dividends that drain the company of its operating cash. They cut staffing and services to maximize short-term returns and bolster on paper the value of the company. And then they exit within a 5 to 7 year window, leaving a hollowed out company behind. That means the community, the workers, and the customers all bear the risk, but the PE firm books the return. And our tax code is subsidizing this. The carried interest loophole saved just 8 individual people, executives, at Blackstone and KKR, a collected $335 million in taxes in 5 years. 8 people, $335 million. And the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, remember the one that was signed last July, left that loophole entirely intact, even though President Trump himself suggested it should be looked at. Folks, ESOPs are the alternative. We are the antidote, and we need to be saying so much louder and much more forcefully. Now, the third force is one I call the greatest succession opportunity in American history. And right now, it is also the greatest succession risk. Baby boomers own approximately 12 million businesses, about 40% of all privately held small businesses, employing more than 25 million Americans. Over the next decade, an estimated $10 trillion in business assets will change hands. Fewer than 1 in 3 of those owners has a formal succession plan. This, of course, is the silver tsunami. 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age every single day. And those who own a business need an exit strategy. Now, private equity is actively positioning itself as the buyer of first resort for this wave of transitions. ESOPs need to become the buyer of first resort instead. The ESOP model is uniquely suited to this moment. It allows an owner to exit on favorable terms, often with significant tax advantages under Section 1042, while keeping the business intact, the employees employed, and the legacy preserved. The owner gets liquidity, the employees get ownership, the community keeps the business. Our work over the next 3 to 5 years must include a major push to reach boomer business owners before private equity does. We need policies that ensure sellers are not forced to take an artificially low valuation for fear of government second-guessing or downstream litigation if they sell to an ESOP. We need new finance tools to make deals work so sellers can achieve liquidity and not be forced to self-finance the deal. And we need changes that reduce the cost and complexity of ESOP formation. We need to make ESOP formation and administration more routine and affordable. Not every ESOP needs to be a bespoke plan, and costs must come down. Now, the fourth force is the one keeping a lot of people up at night right now. In boardrooms, in union halls, and in the offices of members of Congress, who at this point just don't quite know what to do about it. Artificial intelligence and automation are reshaping the workforce with a speed and breadth that most institutions are not prepared for. The World Economic Forum projects 92 million roles will be displaced globally in the next 4 years by 2030. The IMF finds that 40% of all jobs worldwide face meaningful exposure to AI capabilities. That figure rises to 60% in advanced economies like ours. In just the first 4 months of this year alone, nearly 78,000 tech job losses have already been directly attributed to automation. But here's the deeper question that too few in Washington are asking. Even for the workers who keep their jobs, who is going to be capturing the productivity gains? Now, there was a landmark study recently found that in a high AI adoption economic scenario, with no structural change to who owns our economy, the combined wage and capital income accruing to workers falls by roughly 5 percentage points a year. When you combine that with inflation, that means the buying power of the average workers will be dropping by almost 10% per year. And this means that AI is intensifying the trend disproportionately toward rewarding capital over labor, unless, of course, the workers own the capital. Now, this is the core insight that makes employee ownership so vital in the age of AI. Because when a company deploys automation and productivity rises, the gains flow to whoever owns that company. In a conventional structure, that means shareholders and executives. In an ESOP company, it means the employees. And the productivity gains that might otherwise hollow out a middle class instead build it. We need to be at the table in every AI policy conversation in Washington, not as a special interest, but as the solution. Now, the fifth force operates more quietly than the others, but it may be the most consequential for the immediate ESOP growth. For nearly 50 years, since ERISA was enacted in 1974, ESOP transactions have operated under a fog of regulatory ambiguity. The central question of adequate consideration, the standard governing how ESOP shares are priced, has never been clearly defined in regulation. And that ambiguity has cost us thousands of potential ESOPs. Transactions never started because advisors couldn't give the sellers reasonable certainty. Companies explored and then abandoned because the litigation risk was determined to be too high, or the valuation was being viewed as intentionally suppressed so as to avoid DOL scrutiny. Now, here's the good news, and it is genuinely good news, is that is now changing. The current Department of Labor has placed adequate consideration on its regulatory agenda for this year. The Retire Through Ownership Act is now pending a floor vote in the full House of Representatives, after passing every other legislative hurdle unanimously. And that would establish a clear statutory definition for ESOP valuations, giving trustees the certainty they need to move forward, with minimal risk of being second-guessed. Now, a DOL that issues workable adequate consideration rules that rest on a statutory foundation passed resoundingly by Congress would effectively remove the single biggest structural barrier that has created impedance to ESOP formation for the last several decades. Regulatory clarity is not a sexy headline, and it doesn't make a good viral social media campaign. But in the long run, it may be the most powerful accelerant we have. Without it, everything we're building would be built on sand. Now, the sixth force is the one that makes me most optimistic, and the one that makes this moment genuinely historic. Employee ownership is one of the very few economic policy ideas that generates genuine enthusiasm on both sides of the political aisle. Republicans see it as capitalism working as it should, distributing ownership broadly, incentivizing productivity, and reducing dependence on government programs. Democrats see it as a powerful tool to reduce wealth inequality, improve retirement security, and give workers a voice in the companies that shape their lives. Great thing is they're both right. and that is exceptionally rare in Washington today. Last July, when the Senate Help Committee voted to advance the Retire Through Ownership Act and the Employee Ownership Representation Act, Chairman Bill Cassidy and Ranking Member Bernie Sanders stood shoulder to shoulder in their praise for the ESOP model. And think about that. In the most divided Congress in generations, on the same bill unanimously. And it has been this way at every stage of the legislative journey. Bernie reminded the room that day that even Ronald Reagan once called employee ownership the next logical step in the American economy. And nearly 40 years later, Congress appears finally ready to take that step. And this is not a fragile consensus. It is durable, it's ideologically coherent, and it gives us something rare, a policy agenda that can survive changes in who controls Washington. Now, the seventh force requires us to think more like strategists and not just advocates. We are in a very favorable environment today, and we should press every advantage while we have it. But honest preparation is how movements endure across administrations. And we must always plan with clear eyes for what political shifts could mean. Now, let's look. If Democrats regain the majority in the 26 or the 28 elections, beyond the immediate rush of oversight and reestablishing checks and balances on the executive branch, Democrats will need to tackle the substance of affordability and economic policy that is fueling so much voter anger. And the top target for that will be a rewrite of that one big beautiful bill. If you haven't noticed recently, billionaires and their hold over government purse strings are getting a lot of attention and not in a good way. Democrats have already begun to signal loudly that private equity tax breaks like that carried interest loophole would be among their top targets, along with the broader array of private equity tax shields that the one big beautiful bill left intact. And Republicans, whose rural small town communities with lost jobs and PE displacements are increasingly supportive of this as well. And here's the critical strategic opportunity for us. Those tax expenditures represent hundreds of billions of dollars in annual federal revenue foregone. So when a potential new Democratic majority moves to recapture those revenues, the question will not only be how much to recover, but what are we going to do with the proceeds? We must be in that room with data and legislative proposals already drafted, making the case that those resources should be redirected to fund ESOP expansion, expanded incentives, new ESOP finance programs, reduced transaction costs, federal matching for technical assistance, and simplified plan administration. The frame we need to establish now before any election is the policy question is not whether to tax private equity. The policy question is whether to use those revenues to expand ESOPs. And we are going to own that answer. If a Democrat wins the White House in 2028, a comprehensive rewriting of major tax policy becomes almost certain, because the One Big Beautiful Bill Act will be right near the top of the list of Trump economic policies that they will want to unwind. And believe me, they will not hold back this time. If Republicans retain the majority or win the presidency again in 2028, what do? Well, we maintain and deepen the current gains of the current environment. We push hard for the passage of the American Ownership and Resiliency Act. We continue working with the Department of Labor on regulatory and sub-regulatory guidance with the goal of eliminating uncertainty, increasing simplicity, and lowering the cost of forming and operating an ESOP. And we press for ESOP expansion provisions in any subsequent tax legislation, framing employee ownership as the pro-growth, pro-worker, anti-government dependence policy that it is. But before we ever get there, let me be direct. We need to make employee ownership part of the 2028 presidential conversation on both sides. The candidates who run in 2028 will be building platforms on AI and workforce disruption, on wealth inequality, on retirement security, and the future of Main Street business. Those are our issues, every single one of them. So starting this year, we should be conducting outreach to the likely presidential field of both parties with a compelling policy briefing. We should be hosting candidate forums and working with sympathetic policy advisors to draft ESOP provisions into platform language. We should be building the relationships now so that when a candidate says, I want to double the number of employee-owned businesses in America, and believe me, one of them will, because the political opportunity is too clear to miss. We have already written the policy behind that promise. So the goal for us is not to pick who the winner should be. It is to ensure the winner, whoever that might be, takes office already committed to expanding ESOPs. So what do we do with this moment? Well, in the immediate term, the next 6 to 18 months, we push the Retire Through Ownership Act and the Employee Ownership Representation Act through the House. These bills passed committee unanimously. They deserve a floor vote. We continue to engage actively in the Department of Labor's rulemaking process on adequate consideration. We must ensure the rule that emerges enables ESOP formation, it doesn't impede it. And we begin systematic research in the 2026 congressional elections, building the relationships and briefing materials that position us for the 28 presidential cycle that will start the day after this fall's general election. In the medium term, 12 to 36 months, we build the infrastructure to intercept the silver tsunami wave before it defaults to private equity or closure. Partner with the SBA, state business development agencies, the accounting and legal communities in simplifying ESOP plans and transactions. Again, not every ESOP needs to be bespoke. Every retiring business owner in America should know that an ESOP is a viable and attractive option, and that's just not the case today. We need to develop and publish a comprehensive policy brief on private equity tax expenditures with a detailed proposal for redirecting those revenues toward expanding ESOPs. Peer-reviewed, scored if possible, and in the hands of the Ways and Means and Finance Committee staff before the next major tax debate begins. And we need to launch a dedicated initiative positioning ESOPs as the primary worker ownership response to artificial intelligence displacement. Employee ownership is not just a retirement policy or a succession policy anymore. Employee ownership is going to be a technology policy. Now, in the longer term, years 4 and 5, depending on the outcome of the 26 and 28 elections, be ready with a comprehensive ESOP Expansion Act, expanding financing mechanisms, new incentives for AI-intensive industries, federal investment in technical assistance. And our goal should be to double the number of ESOP companies and ESOP employee owners in America within a decade. We can get there. The policy window is open. The research base is solid, and the bipartisan support is real. I want to close this morning with something that I believe deeply. There are moments in history where the right idea and the right moment find each other. When the conditions that have been building for years, demographic, technological, social, political, converge to make a particular solution not just attractive, but necessary. And I believe we're living in that moment for employee ownership today. The retirement system is failing tens of millions of Americans. The ESOP model fixes it. Private equity is extracting value from Main Street businesses and communities. The ESOP model preserves it. $10 million or $10 trillion in business wealth is changing hands. And without intentional action, too much of it will be consolidated by billionaires or simply disappear. The ESOP model instead captures it for the workers and the communities that have helped build it. AI is reshaping who captures the gains from productivity. The ESOP model ensures workers share in those gains. Regulatory ambiguity has suppressed ESOP formation for almost 50 years, and we are finally on the verge of ending it. And whatever happens in 2026 and 2028, the political alignment for employee ownership from both directions has never been stronger. Folks, we are standing not at the end of something, but we are standing at the beginning of a renaissance. The momentum is ours. The moral argument is ours. The bipartisan support is ours. The strategic horizon, if we plan well and we advocate relentlessly, is ours. All that remains is to seize it. Are you with me?